Okay, picture this. You've got a top-performing employee, right? I mean, they're absolutely crushing it this month, just blowing past their goals with weeks to spare. But then they do something completely counterintuitive. They just stop. They literally pump the brakes and intentionally withhold their effort. Now, why on earth would someone do that? It sounds completely backwards, doesn't it? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why this bizarre phenomenon happens, and more importantly, how to fix it by diving into something known as the Ratchet effect. Okay, let's dive into this. Do you remember the legendary pole vaulter, Sergei Bubka? Over the course of his career, this guy broke the world record for pole vaulting an absolutely mind-boggling 35 times. But here is the really fascinating part. His sponsor, Nike, was offering him these massive bonuses, up to 100 grand every single time he broke the record. So what did Bubka do? Well, he definitely didn't jump as high as humanly possible right out of the gate. No way. Instead, he broke the record by incredibly tiny increments. We're talking just an inch at a time. He was intentionally holding back his actual capability to make sure he could easily clear the bar, break the record again, and collect that check again and again in the future. He literally maximized his rewards by restricting his current performance. Section 1. Defining the Ratchet effect and why top performers withhold effort. So Bubka is a brilliant example from the sports world. But let's define exactly what's happening behind the scenes in corporate offices around the globe every single day. What we just saw with Bubka is a classic textbook example of the Ratchet effect. Formally, it's defined as the restriction of current performance in order to achieve attainable targets in the future and maximize rewards. Basically, it works like this. Employees realize pretty quickly that if they totally knock it out of the park today, management is just going to raise the bar. They're going to ratchet up that target for tomorrow. So by totally overperforming right now, employees are essentially just punishing their future selves with significantly harder targets. Let's look at how this actually plays out in a super relatable, everyday office scenario. Imagine you're a salesperson. Step 1, your quarterly goal is set at $250,000. Step 2, you are having a stellar quarter. Halfway through, boom, you hit that $250,000 mark early. You know for a fact you could easily push right on to $350,000. But wait, Step 3 kicks in. You know that if you hit $350,000 this quarter, your boss is absolutely going to expect that exact same level next quarter. So, to avoid facing a totally grueling target down the road, what do? You completely slow down. You might even call up your customers and ask them to delay taking delivery until the next quarter. You're locking in your current commission, sure, but you're intentionally holding back your true potential. And it's not just the sales team making these kinds of calculations. This happens everywhere. Take an accounting department going through a month-end close. Let's say the target is finishing in 12 hours, but things are clicking perfectly this month, and you realize, hey, we can actually wrap this up in 10 hours. But here's the catch. If you finish in 10 hours, you risk management just permanently setting the new baseline target to 10 hours. Then, if you hit a snag next month, you are immediately set up for failure. So what do? Do you finish early, or do you take the full 12 hours just to maintain that safe buffer for yourself? Honestly, if finishing early guarantees a harder target next time, most people are going to choose the buffer for sure. Section 2, when targets go awry and the hidden costs. So we can totally see why individuals make these choices on a personal level, but when this ratchet effect really takes hold, the damage to an entire organization can be severe. When your targets and incentive structures start backfiring, distinct red flags are going to begin to appear. Look, organizations obviously want to push their teams to grow and improve, and that is a completely noble goal. But when targets are just constantly moving upwards without any real justification, it creates an incredibly toxic environment. If your incentive programs are failing you, these red flags are exactly what it looks like.
So what specifically should you be looking out for? The source research highlights a few major warning signs. You're going to see employees regularly missing their targets. You'll definitely notice a distinct lack of collaboration across the company. Everyone just retreats into their own little silos to protect their personal metrics. Strategic goals will inevitably fail. And honestly, perhaps the most painful one, you're going to see high turnover, especially among your absolute top talent who just get burned out from running on an endless treadmill. That leads to a total inability to attract new talent, and the folks who do stick around, they start showing some really severe symptoms of stress. Make no mistake, these are the hidden organizational costs of constantly ratcheting targets up. If you want a stark, real-world cautionary tale of what happens when this goes completely unchecked, we really only need to look at Wells Fargo back in 2016. Top management was putting incredibly heavy pressure on lower-level managers to increase business through cross-selling. The problem?
The targets they set were completely unachievable through standard, honest, hard work. So, feeling cornered, and just to keep their jobs and meet these relentless targets, employees resorted to the fraudulent creation of new accounts without any client authorization. It is a really sobering example of a total, systemic collapse in trust, communication, and target setting. Section 3. The power of trust, a data-backed solution. All right, so how do we actually fix this? How do we stop employees from holding back without creating the kind of pressure cooker environment that leads to massive ethical breaches? Let's pivot to the solution, which brings us to some really fascinating academic research. Researchers Jasmine C. Bull and Jeremy Lill actually set out to find a solution to this exact problem. They analyzed data from a cooperative of independent banks, specifically looking at bank managers. They really wanted to see exactly how past performance was impacting the creation of new profitability targets. And crucially, they wanted to test if one specific, very human factor could neutralize the Ratchet effect: trust. They decided to look at managers and subordinates in what they called high-trust environments versus low-trust environments.
And wow, the data reveals a truly stark contrast. Let's look at how targets get revised after a really good year. In a low-trust environment, supervisors heavily penalize success. They take about 60% of the employee's past overperformance and just bake it directly into the new target. Ouch, right? But check this out. In a high-trust environment, supervisors only incorporate about 27% of that past performance into the new goal. The high-trust managers actually recognize that, hey, maybe it was a one-time windfall, or maybe just a burst of exceptional hard work, rather than a permanent change in the market, so they don't unfairly raise the bar.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact on the employees themselves. Look at this. In a low-trust environment, the second the target is hit, the employee completely coasts. Their performance in the current quarter actually drops to 87% of what it was previously. They are actively holding back to protect next year's goal. But in a high-trust environment, employees who have already hit their target actually keep pushing. Their performance increases to 102%. Why? Because they simply aren't afraid of being punished for succeeding.
The crucial takeaway here is summarized perfectly by the researchers. When managers and employees trust each other, they can get to the point when targets only increase because it's justified. The core issue we are dealing with here is information asymmetry. Basically, the employee knows exactly how hard the goal really is, and the manager just kinda doesn't. Trust is what bridges that gap. The manager trusts the employee isn't just slacking off, and the employee trusts that the manager isn't going to unfairly hike the targets just because they had one incredible quarter. Section 4. Alternatives to trust and structural solutions. Now, of course, building a deep organizational culture of trust is a lot easier said than done. It takes real time. So what if you just don't have that high-trust environment yet? Well, the research acknowledges that there are a few other structural workarounds to prevent the Ratchet effect.
To stop employees from restricting their output, organizations can try a few of these structural solutions. You could use contracting, literally writing up long-term agreements that say targets will absolutely remain fixed. You could try job rotation, constantly moving employees around so they literally don't care about next year's target for a specific role. You can invest millions in improved information systems to just heavily monitor all the work and completely remove that information asymmetry. You could use relative performance evaluation, basically grading people on a curve against their peers. Or I suppose you might just rely on a tight labor market, where employees are simply too terrified of losing their jobs to ever hold anything back.
But here is the catch. Every single one of those alternatives comes with a very heavy trade-off. Think about it. If you use job rotation to prevent ratcheting, you completely lose out on your employees developing any sort of specialized expertise. If you use strict contracting to guarantee fixed targets, well, your company loses the agility to adapt to real economic changes. Grading on a curve, that can totally destroy teamwork. And heavy monitoring is just incredibly expensive. This proves exactly why trust is ultimately the most efficient, cost-effective tool a manager has. It's really the only solution that doesn't carry a massive structural penalty along with it. All of this brings us to a really critical question that you have to ask about your own organization. Take a hard, honest look at your workplace incentives. Are your performance targets actually motivating your team to achieve greatness? Or are they secretly forcing your absolute best performers to hold back their true potential? It is a very fine line between pushing for continuous improvement and accidentally triggering the Ratchet effect. Understanding that delicate balance and putting in the work to build the trust required to maintain it, well, that's the true art of management. Think about that the next time you review your quarterly goals. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.